Previously on the Genesis account of Noah's Ark, we briefly investigated whether Noah's Ark has ever been found, and also explored how many cultures around the world also have legends of a worldwide flood, and why that would be. Join us now as we pose several questions such as, what are the biblical kinds of animals that were on Noah's Ark? How many were there? And begin to explore how could only 8 people possibly care for all of them, in part 6 of the Genesis account of Noah's Ark. One of the most important issues relating to the Bible's flood account is, of course, the topic of the animals on the ark. The estimated numbers, sizes, and types of ark animals impacts nearly every aspect of the vessel's interior operations, including time and labor expenditure, food and water needs, space and waste management, and enclosure design, etc. So the subject of fitting and caring for all of the required animals on the ark is a significant point of contention between biblical creationists and skeptics. However, properly addressing these concerns is somewhat more complicated than a mere compilation of data about different animal species. First, we have to answer some fundamental questions. Which animals were required to be on board the ark? The Bible informs us that the ark housed representatives of every land-dependent, air-breathing animal, ones that could not otherwise survive the flood, in Genesis 7 verses 21 to 23. Conversely, Noah didn't need to care for marine animals, and he probably didn't need to bring insects, with the possible exception of delicate insects like butterflies and moths, since most insects could survive outside of the ark in eggs or floating clumps of vegetation and debris. Also, the Bible specifies that those creatures destroyed outside of the ark were those in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life. And this likely excludes insects as they don't have nostrils and take in oxygen through spiracles in their skin. One of the contentions to the feasibility of the ark skeptics always bring up is how many species are in the world today. It's often asserted that there are millions and millions of species in the world, far more than the number that could fit on board the ark. However, according to estimates published in 2014, there are fewer than 1.8 million documented species of organisms in the world. Consider also that 98% of those species are fish, invertebrates, and non-animals like plants and bacteria. So this means that there are actually fewer than 34,000 species of known land-dependent vertebrates in the world today. But this brings us to a very important question. Did Noah bring species of animals or kinds? Though wild animals today are often considered according to their species, the Bible deals with the animals according to their min, a common Hebrew word usually translated as kind. We can infer from Scripture, Genesis 1:11 to 25 specifically, that God created plants and animals to reproduce after their kinds, and it's clear from various texts that a kind is often a broader category than the current concept of a species. This means that a kind may contain many different species. Since Noah was only sent select representatives from relevant kinds, all land-dwelling vertebrate species not present on the ark were wiped out. Therefore, if we see an ark kind represented today by different species, for example, horses, zebras, and donkeys of the horse kind, those species have developed since the time of the flood. Therefore, species are simply varying expressions of a particular kind. So what is an animal kind then? Well, there are numerous approaches to defining a kind, but one of the simplest is a created, distinct type of organism and all of its related descendants. Kinds are often referred to as baramins, bara and min, from the Hebrew words created and kind, and the study of created kinds is called baraminology. What then are the criteria for identifying kinds? Well, there's likely been no more vigorous and intense study into all things Noah's Ark than the Answers in Genesis U.S. Ministries' efforts to put together its world-class, life-size replica of the biblical ark known as the Ark Encounter, which contains information on every aspect of this historical craft imaginable. And in 2011, Ark Encounter researchers, composed of several creation scientists, began in-depth animal studies with the goal of identifying the maximum number of ark kinds. The researchers applied 3 primary criteria in establishing the Ark kinds: hybridization, cognitive, and statistical baraminology. Hybrid data is the most favored method in identifying kinds. Researchers believe that only closely related animals can successfully produce offspring, and this is consistent with the Bible's emphasis on the relationship between reproduction and created kinds. Since only animals in the same kinds are related, hybrids positively identify which animals are part of the same kind. The usefulness of hybrid data is limited, however, in that not all potential crosses have been tested or reliably documented. Some organisms have even gone extinct. So hybridization is also strictly an inclusive criterion, as not even all related animals can reproduce offspring together, meaning some creatures have lost the ability to reproduce with certain others of their kind. Now, the cognitive approach is likely the most natural for people, as it estimates animal kinds using the human senses of perception. This method assumes that animal kinds have maintained their core distinctiveness even as they have diversified over time, meaning their overall design is equated with common ancestry. Presently, extinct animals are most often classified using this approach. For example, woolly mammoths are extinct and there are no hybrid data connecting them with elephants. However, their extreme similarity to elephants has resulted in their obvious placement in the elephant kind. In statistical analysis, continuities and discontinuities of animals are identified by comparing physical traits using statistical tests called barometric distance correlation, or BDC. Like the cognitive approach, this method assumes that the physical similarities and dissimilarities identified in the tests are reliable indicators of relatedness. Specific designs or differences equate with common ancestry. It also assumes that the traits selected for comparison are barometrologically significant. Now, knowing that everything they produced would be scrutinized for any imagined exaggerations or inaccuracies or weaknesses in their estimates by Bible skeptics, the Ark Encounter team put several safeguards in place to avoid underestimating the number of animals they felt needed on the Ark. These included a tendency to split rather than lump animal groups. Also, all clean and all flying creatures, not just clean flying creatures, were multiplied by 14 instead of 7 animals. Now, most people will ask, well, what are splitting and lumping? Well, estimating the number of animals on the Ark depends on several factors. Near the top of that list is the decision to split or lump the animals that may or may not be related as a kind. For example, coyotes, wolves, dingoes, and domestic dogs can generally interbreed. Thus, they can be lumped into the same kind. So Noah just needed 2 members of the dog kind on the Ark. On the other hand, there are approximately 24 known families of bats living and extinct. Based on anatomy and other features, many of these families probably belong to the same kind. For example, if we use the cognitive criteria. In fact, it's possible that every bat belongs to the same kind. However, since breeding studies have not yet confirmed this idea, the Ark Encounter researchers split the bats into their various families. So instead of including as few as 14 bats on the Ark, the information depicts over 300 of them, 14 from each family. In keeping with the worst-case approach to estimating the number of animals on the Ark, the animals were split into separate kinds whenever the data was insufficient to support lumping them into a single kind, all to give the most fair estimates possible. Now, why 14 instead of 7? Well, some Bible translations indicate that Noah was to bring 7 of each flying creature and clean animal. Yet, other Bible translations state that 7 pairs of these creatures were on the Ark. Why? Well, the Hebrew text here in Genesis 7:2 literally reads, 7, 7, a male and his female. But does this unique phrasing mean 7 or 14? In favor of the 7 view is that Genesis 8:20 states that Noah sacrificed clean animals and birds after the flood. While it doesn't say that Noah sacrificed just 1 animal of each clean kind, those who hold to the 7 view could point to the common 6 and 1 pattern seen in the Old Testament. For example, God created the world in 6 days and rested for 1 as per Exodus 20:11. Perhaps 6 of each clean animal were for man's use and 1 was to be dedicated to the Lord. However, in favor of the 7 pairs view is the text's mention that there would be male and his female for the clean animals. If an odd number were brought to Noah, then plenty of animals didn't have a mate. Furthermore, the Hebrew text does not use similar wording with the unclean animals in verse 2. That is, readers can know that 1 pair of unclean animals was in view, but the text does not say two, a male and his female. It just has the word for 2. Since even Hebrew language scholars don't agree about this issue, it seems wise to be tentative about which view is accurate. So, since a worst-case approach is being used in regard to the animals, these calculations are based on the 7 pairs position. Now, if you're wondering what's meant by that, the Ark Encounter team depicts a worst-case approach as in what's the largest possible maximum when estimating the number of animal kinds that might be needed on board. Some people believe Noah brought 2 of every unclean animal and 7 of every clean animal. The text seems to indicate that Noah cared for more animals than this in Genesis 7, 2, and 3, particularly when it comes to the clean animals and flying creatures. The Lord may have sent 7 pairs of the clean animals and 7 pairs of all the flying creatures, not just the clean varieties. Although this worst-case approach more than doubles the estimated number of animals on the ark, this model shows that even a high-end estimate of total animals would fit on board the ark. Obviously, if the Lord had just sent 7 of each clean animal and 7 of just the clean flying creatures, the ark would have had plenty of excess space to accommodate this lower total. So based on these projections, the Ark Encounter team estimated that there were fewer than 1,400 animal kinds on the ark. And it's anticipated that future research may reduce that number even further. Join us next time as we continue to deep dive into the question of how many individual animals were on the ark and begin to answer the numerous objections to the idea of how only 8 people cared for all of the animals on board the ark in Part 7 of the Genesis account of Noah's Ark.